Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's virtual conversation with author Alex Segura. This is an event called the LitLIVE Extra. I'm Dorothy Klein, the Executive Director of the Broward Public Library Foundation. The foundation is so pleased to bring you this special opportunity to sit back and listen in as Alex and South Florida Mystery Critic Oline Cogdill talk about Alex's storytelling and writing, and, of course, his latest book, Alter Ego. If you are a mystery fan, and I'm assuming that most of you are, you need to know about Broward County Library's new mystery book collection, funded through the Library Foundation by the Isabel and Stanley Rebell Foundation and Endowment Fund. Within the next couple of months, more than 180 mysteries will be purchased and put on the shelves of the Pompano Beach Library. And they are all available for checkout. Every year, the plan is for this collection to keep on growing. And I'm happy to say that Alex's Miami Midnight, one of the Pete Fernandez series, is part of this collection. In addition to the books, a series of mystery-themed events is also planned at the Pompano Library. I hope you'll check this out. I want to thank Nova Southeastern University, our sponsor this year of all LitLIVE programming that we are doing. And I'd like you to meet now Joey Crawford, the chair of the Library Foundation Board of Directors, who will introduce Oline Cogdill. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, and thank you for everybody attending this evening. As Dorothy mentioned, I'm the chair of the board of directors for the Broward Public Library Foundation. Founded in 1982, we serve as the fundraising arm for the Broward County Library System. We have an active board of directors who oversee the foundation by providing input on fundraising initiatives, grant making, investments, and program funding. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our numerous programs and services complement those already funded by the Broward County tax dollars, which impact our 37 libraries within the system. And now it's my distinct honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Oline Cogdill. Oline H. Cogdill reviews mystery fiction for the Sun Sentinel and Fort Lauderdale Tribune Publishing Wire, Shelf Awareness, and Publishers Weekly. She's been honored with the Raven Award for the Mystery Writers of America, and Oline continues to be a judge for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in the Mystery Thriller category. Oline also has an essay on reviewing in the award-winning book, How to Write a Mystery, co-edited by Lee Child and Lori R. King. And in addition to her illustrious resume, she's been a longtime moderator at LitLIVE and frequently shows her support by contributing write-ups about our authors, their books, and our events via the Sun Sentinel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll now turn it over to Oline Cogdill.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank each member of the audience for being here, for being readers, for supporting libraries, and when you can, buying books. So thank you. We're going to have fun tonight. Alex Segura, it's kind of a homecoming for him. He grew up in Miami. He worked at the Sun Sentinel as an intern after college, right, Alex?
Yep.
And he's had a really good career. His novel, Secret Identity, won the Anthony Award, Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and was on top of several best of the year lists, including my own. Alter Ego, which is his newest novel, is a sequel of sorts to Secret Identity, and it also made several best of the year lists, including mine, and received just really glowing reviews. He's also the author of the acclaimed Pete Fernandez series, as well as Star Wars novel, a YA Spider-Man verse adventure, and he's also written several comics for Marvel and DC, and he's one of the writers behind the relaunch of Dick Tracy. Alex, so good to see you again.
Oh, it's so good to see you. Thanks everybody for having me. Broward Public Library Foundation, the great team behind all this and making it happen. Thanks to everyone for coming. This should be fun. It does feel like a homecoming. It's nice to be here, albeit virtually.
Now, Alex, you were kind of on track, I think, to become a journalist.
Mhm.
But what inspired you to instead begin your series about Pete Fernandez, a reporter turned private detective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had just moved to New York to work in publicity at DC Comics, and so I was in comics. What had long been a hobby and sometimes a job became a full-time gig. And I started reading outside. I mean, I'd always read mysteries. I'd always read Raymond Chandler, Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, and Dashiell Hammett, the classics. But during that period, I got really immersed in more modern PI series like Laura Lippman's great Tess Monahan books, the Nick Stefanos books by George Pelecanos, Easy Rollins by Walter Mosley, and I could go on and on. Michael Connelly's Bosch books, even though those are procedurals, but and the one thing they all shared was a strong sense of setting. Laura Lippman's Baltimore is very definitive. Michael Connelly's LA or Pelecanos's DC. And my first thought was while reading these was maybe I should try and do one myself. Like just for fun. I knew that there had been some great Miami crime novels like Miami Blues and Miami Purity and Carolina Garcia Aguilera's books, Lupe Solano books were also excellent. But I felt like I was homesick too. That should be the top line item is I was really homesick for South Florida. And I was really like in a new place. And that first year in New York can be very lonely and very isolating, which is ironic because you're surrounded by people. But so the idea for Pete really sprung from there. And I'd already kind of moved away from journalism. Journalism is I'm not going to deny it, it's just such an exhausting profession. It's hard. It's really hard. And the hours are never great. I remember my hours at the Herald were nights and weekends. And my weekend was Wednesday, Thursday. And then you're on this kind of vampire schedule where you get off work at 2 a.m. and you're kind of wide awake because you've just been through that buzz of the deadline crunch. And so I felt very on the opposite side of where people were functioning usually. But I wanted to show the origin of a detective as opposed to meeting a detective that was entrenched and already established. When you meet Marlowe, he's Marlowe already. You're not seeing the origin of Marlowe or Lou Archer. He's well established in the Ross McDonald books. And I really loved what George Pelecanos did with those Nick Stefanos books, and that you see this kind of screw up, stumble into becoming a private eye, and then it starts to take. And so that's the journey that you take. You go with Pete in those first 5 books. You explore him starting as a reporter who's not very good. He's not a very good reporter. He's an active alcoholic. He's moved back to Miami from New York after the death of his father he doesn't know, he takes a job on the sports copy desk. It's not what he's wanted to do, and he's very unhappy. And so he finds a spark in investigating this missing person case. And that's really what propels the series for 5 books. And then by the end of the series, without spoiling too much, it's been over for a couple of years. He decides, yes, this is for me. He's in recovery. He's kind of getting his life together. He's had a baby. He's getting married. And so as all the dust settles, that's where it ends, because now he's begun this. I always see that he's gone into like this more episodic series where he's more of a Lou Archer, Philip Marlowe type detective, where it's about the case and less about his journey. He's become the PI. And so that was a really interesting moment for me that I didn't see on the page a lot, the journey from amateur detective to professional detective.
I love that series, and you're right.
Oh, thanks.
We seldom see the detective at the beginning of his career, during his first one. I thought that was really fascinating. And also you captured the newspaper world and the newsroom culture, which, has its own culture.
yeah. It's a very different vibe, and I'm really drawn to stories that are strong in not only setting geographically, but setting in terms of where the mystery happens. And so
Right.
I was sad that I say it as if I didn't decide, but I was sad that he moved away from newspapering to become more of like a freelance detective. But I also really thought that was a vibrant way to start the book. And I think you, as a writer, you always have to pull from these things or be very thoughtful about where you place these books, because it's very fertile territory. Like the newspaper, there's a whole different language, and you see it still with Secret Identity as well. In terms of like the comic book industry, it just feels different. And readers are smart, and readers love settings and situations that they can learn from.
Right.
That it's something new and different and welcoming, and you kind of get a peek into a world you're not familiar with. At least I do, and I think most readers are like that.
Oh, I totally agree. And
Yeah,
I often say everything I've learned from mysteries,
yeah.
because the research is so good and the settings are
Mhm.
so good. Now the Pete Fernandez series was very well received. I think you got a couple of nominations or a win,
Mhm.
and I liked them a lot. But your novels, Secret Identity and Alter Ego, took you to a whole new level. And
Yeah.
we're set in the comic book world, which we don't really see in mysteries. I know there are novels set in the comic book world, but
Mhm.
nothing a mystery. What inspired you to go to that direction and to write those?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was a few different factors. One goes all the way back to when I was in college, and I think you've heard this story, but I remember vividly reading this novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, written by Michael
Right.
Chabon. And it's a literary novel, and I hate to use the term literary, but it's not a mystery. It's not a sci-fi. It's very much just about these two characters and their evolution and coming of age in the golden age of comics, World War II, post World War II. And I remember reading the book in college and just being like, I love this. I love this book. I felt very seen by the book. I felt
Mhm.
like, wow, somebody's writing a book about something I'm really passionate about, being comics. But there were no comic book pages in the novel. And I remember thinking, well, that would have been neat if they'd done that. And I kind of filed the idea away. Eventually, they did do comics on The Escapist, but it was a separate thing. And then fast forward to around 2019, and the Pete series is ending. I'm finishing up the Star Wars novel, and I knew I wanted to try my hand at a standalone, at something that wasn't part of a series. Haha, with two books behind me. Yeah, God has other plans. But so I wanted to write a mystery that was very strong in not only setting in terms of the city, but also industry and the industry and the world. And I love Megan Abbott's books. I'm a huge Megan Abbott fan. Lucky to call her a friend. But one thing she does very well is that most of her books are, very rooted in female friendship, but they're also very strong in terms of bringing the elements of noir into stories where you wouldn't anticipate noir existing. And I'm kind of a stickler for how I define noir. I think a lot of people use it interchangeably with hard boiled and PI. And for me, it's a very specific thing. It's about a character being forced to make an emotional or primal decision and then having to fix it or having to do something to fix their mistake. They do something out of rage or lust or desire or something very primal drives them to do something. And then once the logic brain kicks in, they have to fix it. They have to kind of get themselves out of that corner. And it doesn't end well always. The thing about noir that I love is that it's not always loaded with happy endings. Um, and so my thought was I want to do a noir novel, but I'm going to take a page out of Megan's book and set it somewhere that maybe most readers don't know about. Like readers know about comic books. They know about the characters, and they know because they're everywhere. They're in the movie theaters, on your TV screen, video games. But there was a time where that wasn't the case. And a lot of people don't know how comics are made, and they don't know how comics were made in the 70s. And so it kind of blended all these things that I was obsessing about: comics, the 70s in New York City. I can't really write a novel without connecting it to Miami in some way. I knew the character was going to be Cuban American and have those roots that I share. Um, and then the idea from Cavalier and Clay came back again, like this idea, like, well, if I'm going to write a character that's in comics creating a comic book, why not show the comic book? And I thought that would be a nice meta twist. Like you're reading about Carmen Valdez, this queer Cuban American woman who moves from South Florida to New York. She wants to write comics, and the only opportunity she gets is writing this character in secret with a collaborator that works at at this publisher she got a job at. But then he's murdered, and so the impetus for her is to solve the murder because it's her friend, and yes, it would be good to know, but also because the only person that knew she created this character, the legendary Lynx, is gone, and so she has to reclaim this idea. And so it's a little bit of a metafictional commentary on IP and character creation, and kind of through the prism of a comic book industry that doesn't exist anymore. Like Now when you write comics, you have all this stuff in mind. You're like, well, if they make it a movie, like you're thinking about it much more in terms of multi-platform, and you know that if you're working for Marvel or DC, you're doing it work for hire. If you can do your own stories that you own, and so it's a much more strategic industry. Whereas I think in the 70s, it was much more like the pulps. Like you went and you wrote a bunch of stories and you got paid, and that was that. You didn't think about character ownership or intellectual property. Like it just wasn't part of the conversation. You did it as either as passion or because you needed the paycheck or both. So,
well, I always say that mystery readers will follow a good story no matter where it leads and
yeah.
no matter the background. I don't, some of us who don't read comics, we're still drawn to this story because it was so provocative and so character driven and setting driven. I mean, I felt I was in the 70s.
Oh,
One of the
good.
provocative things about your story is it very much about women breaking into comics, because in the 70s, that was really kind of discouraged, not really allowed.
Right.
Let's talk about that and how that kind of relates to today's comics.
Yeah, one of the, I get this question sometimes on panels, and the question is, well, why didn't you make the lead of Secret Identity a man? Why did you create Carmen? And my answer is pretty easy. It's like if it had been a man, he would have gotten the job. He wouldn't have had to have written the character in secret at the time. That's the sad irony of that. But I was reading a book called The 10-Cent Plague by David Hadju, and it explored this era of comics where there was this congressional committee basically cracking down on really graphic, like, oh, the EC comics. I'm wearing the T-shirt. EC comics, not by design, I swear. They cracked down on the horror and sci-fi comics that a lot of these publishers were producing, and that created a kind of the industry truncated, and a lot of people lost their jobs. It became much smaller, much more niche. And at the beginning of the book, there's a woman he interviews, and she said, this was my career, and I just kind of disappeared. And after that, I left comics and I never came back. And that really resonated with me. And that's where the kind of broad strokes of the novel, like comics, 1970s, New York City, comics in the novel, really intersected with character. That's where Carmen kind of came out and appeared to me. And I knew that would just make the novel much more compelling, because you're seeing it through the eyes of this character that can't attain the things that come easily to a lot of the men in the book. And I think the industry's changed a millionfold since then. Thankfully, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, not only for women, but also marginalized voices and marginalized creatives. But I think it's a very different industry now. And so that's really what led me to the next book, which I was not expecting while I was writing Secret Identity.
Let's talk about Alter Ego. It is a sequel of sorts.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that? I loved the book. It was just
really
thanks. Well done. But
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I didn't want to just do a sequel. I don't want to belittle the idea, but I didn't want to do a sequel where it was like Carmen investigates comic book mysteries in the 80s, like just following Carmen through and making her kind of minimizing Secret Identity by making it one of many. Like it was just her first case, and then she has a lot of amateur comic book mystery cases. It felt like if I was going to do a sequel, it had to feel equal to and as important as Secret Identity and be in the same world, but not be episodic, if that makes sense. I didn't want it to feel like Secret Identity Part 2, even though it's very much in conversation with Secret Identity. And so Alter Ego is about a film director, Annie Bustamante, who used to work in comics. She used to be an artist. She had great success. She has her own demons that she was struggling with, and for many reasons, she left the industry and fell into storyboarding film. But throughout this whole journey, throughout her childhood and this comic book journey, there was one comic book that always spoke to her, that she would buy whenever she went into a comic shop or saw at a convention. And it was this obscure comic called The Legendary Lynx. And so the Lynx is kind of the bridge between these two women who love comics and who both experience like basically having their dreams presented to them on a silver platter. Carmen with the opportunity to write this character, create this character, and Annie later in Alter Ego is approached by this new Triumph Entertainment company that claims to own the universe of characters from Triumph Comics, and they offer her the opportunity to reboot and relaunch the Lynx. But both of those opportunities come with like very big caveats and very big landmines that they have to get across. Like for Carmen, it's creating the character in secret, and all the all the pitfalls that come from that. And for Annie, it's like the slow burn realization that these people don't know what they're doing. They don't know these characters, and they might not even own these characters. And then as she realizes and kind of peels back the mystery, she starts to realize that maybe the people that claim to have created the links didn't. And that's what connects the two stories. And you do eventually see, it's not a spoiler to say, you do eventually see Carmen in Alter Ego, but I didn't want it to be something where it's like a team up, like where Carmen and Annie team up and solve mysteries together. It's very much, it's almost like Luke Skywalker at the end of Force Awakens. Like he's a presence and you see her and it propels that third act. But I'm a big believer that sequels have to matter. And I didn't want it to feel like, oh, clearly Secret Identity did well, so he had to crank out a sequel. They're very different books. Like Alter Ego to me feels more like a thriller. It's got more of that pacing, whereas Secret Identity is much moodier and more almost like I don't mean to equate myself with Patricia Highsmith, but it feels much more like one of her books, like very moody, and there's not a lot of action in the book. There's really, I think a gun is fired once in the whole book, but it feels like, I hope that the suspense is elevated enough that you feel like you want to keep turning the pages. Whereas Alter Ego, there's a lot more action.
No, I totally agree. I mean, the tension's there, the threat of violence is there, but you don't have to go there to make us feel tense and nervous and invested in this story. It's interesting that you set Secret Identity in the 70s, which I'm not sure, were you born in the 70s?
No, I was born in 1980. Yeah, so I wasn't even around. There was a very specific reason, and I think I was really hesitant when I first started writing mystery novels to write a New York novel. Even I had just moved to New York. I didn't feel like I was up to the task. And I also wanted to explore the idea of a PI in Miami and the Miami that I knew in South Florida. But now, like 9 novels in, I was like, I'm ready to write my New York novel. Obviously, I still wanted connections to my hometown, but I wanted to show a New York that doesn't really exist anymore. And the New York of 1975 is so different from the New York of today, which is very, it's just like the vibe is completely different. You watch shows like The Deuce or things that show you what Times Square was like in the 70s. And I read a lot of books about that era and just like the financial collapse of the city. And that felt really fascinating to me when it was paired with where comics were. Like comics as an industry was dying at the time. They hadn't discovered something that we in the industry call the direct market, which means comic shops where people can go to a comic store and buy comics. Fans had to go to newsstands and hope that the new issue was there. And the business model of the newsstand was failing for comics. For every 100,000 you print, maybe you would sell 20,000. So it was very much an industry in decline. And I think that's the vibe you get reading Secret Identity. Like a lot of the people you meet as you follow Carmen around are kind of just doing it. And it's like being on the Titanic. Everyone felt like, okay, this is ending soon and we'll have to figure out something else. Obviously, it didn't happen that way. And they found the direct market and it became a whole other kind of industry. But I was really fascinated about showing a comic book industry that wasn't about the movies or the characters being in other media. And then interesting, unexpectedly, we got to do it with Alter Ego and show kind of the other side of that coin.
Because Alter Ego is of contemporary times.
Yeah.
And I think you nailed New York in both time periods. I was just fascinated by it. So, and I guess that the contemporary setting felt better for Alter Ego. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Felt better in terms of just
background. I mean, you were showing the industry as it changes.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me, having written Secret Identity, to show Alter Ego as in contrast to Secret Identity, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry now. It's not just comic book publishing, it's movies, it's books, it's novels, video games, everything. And so I wanted to show the stakes and this kind of hunger for intellectual property where companies come out of the woodwork and say, we're going to relaunch these obscure characters nobody's ever heard of because we're one good idea away from $1 billion franchise. Like if this one Lynx movie resonates. And so there's an element of greed that is exponentially greater in Alter Ego than it was in Secret Identity. In Secret Identity, it's a very singular issue that propels the villain, or the bad guy in the mystery. Whereas here, it feels much more endemic. It's a much bigger problem, and you get to see the corners of comics in Alter Ego that I've walked through literally myself. Like, I've been that publicist walking back and forth at the back of the panel room, hoping that the panelists don't say something inappropriate or incorrect. And I tried to give readers a tour of what comics is like, New York Comic Con, panels, the creative process, without bogging down the story. You don't want your books to ever feel like a Wikipedia entry, and that was something that I was trying to be mindful of with both books.
Right, right. We touched on this a little bit before. Your Pete Fernandez was very much steeped in Miami, and Miami, South Florida is briefly touched on in Secret Identity and Alter Ego. How did South Florida as a whole influence your writing?
That's a great question. I think the thing that resonates with me most is the contrast. You have this beautiful paradise, tropical paradise, on the surface, like everything is, it looks wonderful, but underneath there's a lot of complicated people. There's a lot of mysterious stuff going on. There's an undercurrent of, I don't want to say malice, but it's a very unique place in that it's not like, it's not, you wouldn't expect to see the things you see or see happen. And I would see that duality every day. Like, working at the Herald, I would see these news stories come through, local news stories of crimes and things happening, and you kind of you start to absorb those things. I think one of the authors that does a great job of capturing South Florida is Vicki Hendricks. I think she, with Miami Purity, that idea of this tropical paradise, but then there's, she works at a laundromat. She's dealing with the granular stuff of life. And so, when people talk about South Florida as this getaway, there's still there's real people there and real people making bad choices. And you just happen to be doing it in this really beautiful place.
Absolutely. And I love Miami Purity, and talk about dark.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
During the course of a novel or even a short story, characters have to change. They have to have an arc.
Yeah.
I would think the same would apply for an author, that during the course of your writing career, from Secret Identity to Alter Ego, you yourself have changed. So how has your writing changed, and how have you changed?
I think the big change, that's a great question. The big change that happened to me from Secret Identity to Alter Ego was that it went from being a secondary, not secondary, but another career. I would have these I would have day jobs working in marketing or publicity in comics, to just becoming a writer full time. And that changes how you approach projects. I think it changes the dynamic of how you work. I'm a pretty fast, prolific writer. I don't think it sacrifices any quality, but that's what you have to now be more, I have to be more mindful of. It's that, obviously there's the financial part of it. I have to make a living, or I have to try to make a living. But I never want to lose the creative part of it. So the arc has really been going from someone who writes on the side and has had some success writing on the side, to someone who is just writing full time. And that was always the dream, and something that I wasn't really sure was going to happen. And so seeing it happen was really fulfilling, and creatively fulfilling, and personally fulfilling too.
Of course. Now, I have more questions as usual.
Yeah.
I overplanned.
Yeah. It's good.
But we have some great questions from our audience member.
Oh, cool.
So let's go to a few of those.
I'm ready.
Wants to know, what is the secret to a good superhero?
Oh, that's a great question. The secret to a good superhero is pathos, some kind of tragedy. Something has to drive them to be a superhero. I think with Batman, it's the death of his parents motivating him to be a crime fighter. With Spider-Man, it's the idea with great power comes great responsibility. I think all the great superheroes have some defining moment that propels them to do it. The ones that don't resonate are the ones who are just well, I'm just going to put on this cape and I have these powers and I'm going to do this thing just because it's the cool thing to do. Daredevil was blinded by these chemicals and gained these great abilities, but he also lost his dad to organized crime. And was a lawyer. So you have this, this idea of, justice is blind, and it kind of, the metaphor flows through the character. So finding something that is evocative and, tragic, you have to find the tragedy or the pathos of the character.
That's good answer. We also had questions from Claudia, Keisha, and Joanne, but they were all about what inspires you, which we've kind of already talked. But
Right.
Joanne wants to know, did anyone inspire or mentor you?
Oh yeah. So many people. Where do I begin? Like, a lot of writers, one thing I tell new writers is to be part of the community before your book's about to come out.
Mm,
Join the writing community, network with writers, pick their brains. And so many writers were very generous and kind to me when I was not anybody. I was just a fan at BoucherCon or wherever, people like Laura Lippman, Megan Abbott, Greg Rucka, Dwayne Swazinski, just answered my questions, just spent time with me, like this wide-eyed kid who was like trying to figure it out. And never made it about, it never felt transactional. And I had great teachers, Lynn Barrett, who's the head of the FIU creative writing program, tolerated my not great academic efforts, but I think she saw something in me, and so was a very helpful guide. Yeah, I think those are the ones that immediately come to mind. And George Pelicanos has been kind when we've interacted. So yeah, it's really great. Sometimes it's great to meet your heroes.
true. And I always say mystery writers are the best people. They are the
Yes.
nicest.
Yeah.
Whatever aggression they get out on the page. But if you come up to one and say, I like your books, and you're with someone else, you'll say, oh, thank you, but you'll love hers or his.
Yeah.
And that's generosity, I think, really pays off in the work and in the
Right.
fans. Ellie wants to know, I guess, did you ever have is my writing good enough moments? And if you have, how do you move past that?
Yeah, I mean, I have them all the time. I think there's always going to be those imposter syndrome moments, but the reality, what I use or what I think about is I've done this before. I've written a book before. It's happened before. And it's happened and it's been good. And one thing you have to really trust is that you are a reader. We're readers first and foremost. You're always going to be a reader. I'm always reading and I'm reading. And sometimes I pull things from books I read, nonfiction, and it kind of gets into the work. But you know what's good. You know what books you like. And if at the end of the day, if you don't like what you're writing, then you just need to go back and fix it. And but the idea of having done it before is a great balm to me. And I do have those moments all the time. And what I find that's really helpful for that and for those moments where you get jammed up. I'm not a big believer in writer's block. I know some people feel it strongly, and so I don't want to invalidate that. But for me, it's like you just kind of power through. But when I'm stalled out, I just pull out a book that I love and I revisit that book. And that reminds you why you're in this, why you're doing it. You read a book from an author you really admire or whose prose you're really jealous of, and that really gets you excited for the process and for doing it. I think I my prose doesn't come super easily to me. I'm a great plotter and structuralist. I can kind of map out the mystery, but I have to work hard to make sure the words flow well. And that's, you just get an awareness of your skills as you get older and as you get more books under your belt. But the imposter syndrome doesn't go away. You just have to kind of figure out, you have to find tools to mitigate it.
One of my questions is, what are you most proud of with your books?
That's a great question. What am I most proud of? I'm glad, I'm not a theme writer in that when I start a book, I'm not like, this is what it's going to be about. And these are the themes it's going to touch on. It's very much more instinctual, but I'm very proud that these books, even my comic book work and even my work in work for hire situations, 99.9% of the stories are about people overcoming obstacles or overcoming trauma, overcoming tragedy to become kind of this ideal version of themselves. Like really, whether it's addiction, whether it's some traumatic moment or some problem that they have to solve, you learn about their, most of my stuff is character driven, and it's about overcoming that to become yourself. And I think that's a very relatable journey. And and also being able to just actualize the idea. The thing I tell a lot of younger writers is write the book that you want to read that doesn't exist yet, that only you can write. And I feel like I've done that. And I think that's hard to do in this industry and in this market where there's a lot of trends that, are very tempting, like, you should write to the trend so you can be part of this financial boon. But I think readers are drawn to stories that feel original and that feel genuine. So,
And I think readers also know if an author is trying to latch onto that trend,
right.
because
Yeah,
by the time that book comes out, that trend may be gone.
it usually is. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Umberto wants to know, how do you develop twists in mystery-based stories?
I'm a plotter. So that means I have an outline and I kind of know where things are going. I very foolishly at the beginning of my career, I went to BoucherCon in St. Louis. BoucherCon is this big mystery convention, mystery fan convention, if folks don't know. And I
Yeah.
remember listening to Michael Connelly, who's like the best of the best. And I asked him a question. I was like, "Do you plot these things out?" Because I was already working on Silent City and I was having trouble with the book, with my first book. And he said, "No, I just sit and write. I do my research and I sit and write, and I don't have any idea like long term." And I remember thinking, I'm going to try that. And I tried it with Silent City, and halfway through, I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like I just felt completely rudderless. So I think I had to find my own method, and my method is to have a pretty tight outline, but also an outline that is not so tight that I don't give the characters room to do things. There's moments in every book where the character veers off the outline and causes the dominoes to fall, and then I have to rearrange everything. But it's usually for the better. There's a moment in Alter Ego where you find something about Annie and her background and her connection to kind of the lore of Secret Identity that was nowhere in any of the documents. Nothing, none of the outlines, none of the character stuff. And it felt so good, though. It felt like so natural and it made perfect sense. And I was like, I can make this work. And it makes the book better and it creates stronger bonds with Secret Identity, and it really works. But in terms of like building the mystery, my guiding light is that readers are smart, and you have to know that readers don't want to be shortchanged either. You don't want the ending to be, oh, it was that character you saw for 2 seconds and was never mentioned
Right.
in any way. I think readers hate that. I know I hate that as a reader. And it's not so much, I don't think readers want to be surprised. They want to feel like, okay, that was a well-crafted mystery. Like, even if I knew by the third act who the killer was, all the clues were there and I picked them up and I figured it out because I'm a smart reader. And the other scenario is that they get to the end and they didn't know, but then they go back and they say, okay, but they were all there. All the clues were there. So readers want to feel like you didn't pull the rug out from under them. So the key there, it's all in revision. It's all going to happen in revision. You have the big mystery laid out, but then you have to go back and edit and tweak and make sure you're leaving the clues so the smart readers will figure it out. And even if they don't feel like they've been shortchanged.
Right. We have a question from Alexis, who's
Okay.
Literary Feast 2025 co-chair. Thank you, Alexis.
Yeah, thank you.
How are things going with the Dick Tracy reboot?
Good.
He spoke about writing in the 70s, and Dick Tracy is very much from the 30s. How's that being updated?
So the idea, I mean, Dick Tracy, for those who don't know, is a newspaper strip that's been running since the 30s, and it follows this police detective, Dick Tracy, who wears a yellow fedora and a yellow overcoat. It was a movie, most notably in the early 90s, with Warren Beatty and Madonna and Al Pacino. A great film, great cast. So what I did with Michael Moreci, my co-writer, and Geraldo Borges is really, in short, is we rebooted it in the sense that it's more like LA Confidential meets Dick Tracy or Casino Royale. We didn't erase anything. We didn't change any of the lore or the legend of Dick Tracy, but we modernized it so that folks that are looking for a great period piece crime story, and it just happens to feature these characters. So I didn't want to imitate the newspaper strip. I think people that want to read the Dick Tracy newspaper strip know how to get there, and they can find it. And there's years and years of material that write those characters in that style. What we were trying to do was something a little more stylized and different, and a little bit more like a classic crime novel, like something James Ellroy would write. And so I think we've been successful. It's a tough market, but we've managed to put out 10 issues, which has been good, and the response has been strong. People like the characters, and I think we've kept readers on their toes with some twists and changes that do deviate from the canon, but don't, I think, feel in character. And so it's been really fun. I love the character. I love that movie as a kid, and then that's what pulled me into that world.
We have another question, two more from Zane. Thank you, Zane. Okay, today there's a lot of comic book fatigue. How do you keep comics and new comic book characters fresh? And also, who's your favorite superhero?
Oh yeah. Comic book fatigue. I guess your mileage may vary. I feel like comics are pretty vibrant at the moment in terms of just awareness, like they're everywhere, pop culture wise and in film and TV shows, and maybe that's what you mean. But I think the challenge with comics is like anything else. You have to make the reader care about the character. And the hard part with characters that are IP as well, in that they are on lunchboxes and on cartoons, is that the stakes are different. So how do you tell a story when the reader knows, Spider-Man's not going to die, and if he does die, he's going to come back in a few months, because that's, you just can't pull the plug on these established characters. So I think the onus is on the creatives. Like, how do you make this interesting and compelling? And that comes from character. Like for me, the books I read, the comics I'm drawn to are based in character and the conflicts of character. So whether it's an established work for hire thing like Spider-Man or Batman, or something new, at least with something new, like the stakes are different. So you can have those stakes, but it varies.
And
I
who's
think
your
that answered
favorite?
your question.
And
Oh
who's
yeah,
your
who's my favorite?
Not gonna get out of that
I
one.
yeah. I was always like a Spider-Man and a Batman and an X-Men kid. So Spider-Man, because I could really relate to Peter Parker, like this nerdy kid who was not popular and was kind of introverted, but had this secret life, or at least this fantastical life of a superhero. Batman was always like the ideal. I think kids love Batman because you could be Batman theoretically. Like he didn't come from Krypton. He wasn't like an Amazon warrior. He didn't gain superpowers. He was just really good at what he did and smart and worked really hard. Obviously, it helped that he was a billionaire, but you could theoretically become Batman. And the X-Men I love because they're the outsiders, they're the outcasts, and they don't necessarily want these powers. And so it was a great kind of metaphor for a lot of marginalized communities.
Have you written any, this kind of plays off a question that's asked, have you written any scripts for your books, for Secret Identity and Alter Ego? Because I also would love to see those on the screen.
Oh, like a screenplay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was, they were optioned for a little while and then the option lapsed. So any producers out there that are looking for good material, like they're free and clear. I haven't written a screenplay for them. It's something I've thought about, but it's also a question of time.
Okay.
But if they were optioned and someone said, do you want to be in the room? I would very much love to be in the room.
So basically cash the check, right?
Yeah. No, but I mean, if they wanted me to write an episode or what have you, I would happily do it. But yeah.
That would be great. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, Alex is also a judge this year with me and one other person for the LA Times Book Prize. So you do not have another mystery coming out this year because you couldn't judge yourself.
Right.
What is your next novel in mysteries?
So I am writing a Daredevil crime novel, which is featuring Daredevil, the Marvel superhero. But my next mystery is in the vein of Secret Identity and Alter Ego. I don't know what the release date is going to be, but it's an organized crime novel. I joke that it's The Godfather meets the Parallax View through the Cuban crime syndicate of the 80s, like the Cocaine Cowboys era. Yeah. So it's epic in scope, but in the present day, it follows a reporter who is working for one of these floundering political websites or a floundering political website, and she's kind of disillusioned with her career, but she finds this little blue dot of a candidate in Miami Beach, this representative who's running for Senate in Florida. And a lot of people are pinning their hopes on this guy being like the next, like kind of the Cuban American Bobby Kennedy type character, or like an AOC type politician. And she starts following his campaign and becomes really enamored with his politics. And then he's assassinated, and she has to kind of unfurl the mystery and figure out what happened, but it somehow ties into the organized crime from the 80s. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away every little plot beat, but those are the broad strokes. I'm a huge Mario Puzo fan. I love those books. I read them way too early. I read The Godfather way too early. I've said this like I think in every panel I'm on, but I definitely should not have read it at 8. Like now, the father of a 9-year-old, I was like, I don't know what was happening, why I got access to that book, but it definitely paid off and it worked out. And I really love it's such a pulpy book in comparison to the movie, which is much more stylish and kind of almost royal feeling. You feel like they're royalty. In the Puzo novel, it's much grittier, and so I wanted to evoke that through the prism of Miami, but also give it a modern day element that didn't feel like I didn't want it just to be a retro 80s crime novel. I wanted to have some modern touchstones. And I felt like politics was an interesting thing to dip my toe into.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. We need more South
Yeah.
Florida-based mysteries. We really do.
Yeah.
We have two more questions from Alexa.
Oh, cool.
Why do you, and thank you again for being the chair. Why do you write mysteries and not another genre?
I do write some other stuff. I've written some sci-fi novels. I've written YA and middle grade books. Mysteries are my main genre because I love reading them. I love reading. I love, like we talked about at the top of the hour, being transported into different places and seeing stories through the perspectives of people that aren't like me and kind of experiencing the world that way. Like you said so much better than I did. Like I learn a lot of stuff just from reading a mystery. Like you're just in this world. Like I would know nothing about cheerleading had I not read Dare Me by Megan Abbott or if the writing is good and immersive, you feel like you're getting your vegetables with dessert too.
Right. Oh, yeah. And
Mhm.
what's your creative process, Alexia asks, day to day?
That's a good question. I think one of the things you need to do as a writer, whether you're a professional or an amateur or starting out or you are established, is to treat it like a job. It's if you treat the writing like a hobby, it will be a hobby, which may be what you want, and that's fine. But if you want it to be something more substantive, even before it becomes something more substantive, it has to be treated like a job. I wake up and get the kids to school and then sit at my desk and write or do the business of writing, which is not as exciting as just sitting and being creative. But I don't think you have to write every day. I think that's a little bit of gatekeeping. I think if you're slacking, if you're not putting in the work. And the short answer is to put in the work. You have to put in the time, put in the work, treat it like a craft. The more you do it, the better you get. But also you have to be a reader as well. I think sometimes I run into folks who want to write a novel and I'm like, well, what are you reading? Like what, and they just kind of stare blankly, like they're not readers. You have to really immerse yourself in the written word and kind of enjoy books and be a lover of writing and reading and because that's what's going to fuel your writing. If you're not reading anything, you're just going to get static.
Absolutely. And that actually leads to another question
Okay.
from our audience. What books are on your current to be read?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me look.
And that's from another author, Mickey Browning.
Oh, nice. What have I been reading? I read The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I thought was fantastic. What else? This book, Great Expectations by Vincent Cunningham, which was a political campaign book, very much like following an Obama-like candidate. I really like Isabel Cañas's books, Vampires of El Norte. That was really good. And the new William Boyle book, Saints of the Narrow, or that's not the new one, it's the one before the new one that just came out. I love Bill Boyle's stuff is always good.
No,
And
that one just came out.
yeah, that is a new one. Yeah, you're right. And I really loved Megan Abbott's new one, El Dorado Drive. So
I agree with all those.
yeah.
What's the best part of being a writer? A
The
full-time
best the best part, I mean, you're your own boss, so if you complain, you're complaining about yourself. But the best I still think the best part of it, obviously there's the work and the payoff of the work and being creative and getting to do this for a living is a blessing. The best part is meeting readers. I think connecting with people, there's nothing better than someone coming up to you and saying, I read your book on vacation and I couldn't put it down. I didn't leave the hotel room, or, I was so immersed by this, or this was like really, I love this moment. At New York Comic Con, I had a table at New York Comic Con and this one fan came dressed as a character I had written for Marvel, Araña, and she came in costume and she had drawn the character for me because she was like, your Spider-Verse book is my favorite book ever, which is so, I mean, it's such a flattering thing to hear. Like your words do matter. Your words matter to people that read them and to have, so I think it would be sad if you write all these things and they kind of go into a void. So seeing it that it resonates is really the best part. Seeing that it resonates in a good way. I try not to like spend too much time reading online reviews.
No.
Yeah.
There's only a few of us you should be reading.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The real tastemakers. Yeah.
That's right. Robert asks, what is your research process like? Do you ever travel or interact with other people? Or do you primarily just read more comics and more, just
It depends on the book, I'll say. For Secret Identity, the research it became much more of a journalistic endeavor than I had anticipated. I really went in thinking, oh, I know comics, so it'll be fine, and I can just write from my own knowledge. And I ended up having to reread a lot of books I had read over the years to become familiar with the facts and what happened when. But I also interviewed a lot of women that worked and a lot of creators that worked in comics at the time to get a sense of A, what it was like to be a woman in comics at 1975, and also what it was like to just be a creative person working in comics at the time. Like where did people live? Like what kind of a living did you make? And what was it like being in New York in the 70s? Most of the time it is research based, but research belies this sense of homework, and it's not really homework. It's usually whatever I'm obsessing over at a given time then ends up becoming the book. Like if I'm reading I've read a lot of books about organized crime, a lot of books about Miami organized crime, and that's why it became the next book, because it was something that I was really fascinated by, and this idea of writing a Godfather type book in the 80s felt really interesting to me, and kind of trying to capture that magic that really was resonant to me as a reader. So it depends. Like Alter Ego didn't require as much research because I had really lived those experiences of being at the convention or interacting in these meetings. But I did talk to a few women creators just to make sure, I was getting the voice right. Because I think when you do write outside of your own personal experience, the onus is on the author to make sure that they're doing it right, and that there has to be a really good reason for why you're doing it. Not to get too much on a tangent, but I think sometimes writers push back on this idea that they can't write anything they want. And I think writers can write whoever they want or whatever they want. You just have to be ready to be called on it if you don't do it well. And so, better to make sure you're doing it right on the front end.
And we have another from an unknown audience member. What tips
Okay.
would you give to published fiction writers who want to break into comics? How do you break into it?
I joke around that my path into breaking into comics is much longer than I think most people are willing to wait. I worked in comics for years and years as a reporter at Wizard Magazine, as a publicist at DC Comics, and then as a publicist and editor at Archie. And at the same time, I started to do my own writing, but I think the way to break into comics is to create comics. You find someone you can collaborate with, create your own comic, and eventually you will get noticed by the more established companies. But there's no direct path unless you are an established name in another field to just walk in and say, I'm going to write Spider-Man. I think it's a long journey. If the journey is towards writing like Spider-Man or X-Men or Batman, or if you want to write your own stuff, then just start writing it. You just start writing it and you try to find a collaborator and figure out a way to get it out there.
And we have another question from Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay. Hi,
Which
Jeffrey.
of your books would you like to see adopted to the screen?
I would love to see, I think Secret Identity would make a nice like Mad Men period piece. Mad Men type period piece. And I think having the alter ego part of it, you could jump between time frames. I think the Pete Fernandez books would be a fun, I love the show Bloodline. Do you remember that show Bloodline?
Oh, yeah.
That was set in the Keys? I thought that was a great little like South Florida noir.
I love that series. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And I thought that would be really, I thought, one of the I'm blanking on the actor's name, but he played Linda Cardellini's husband. I thought he would have been a great Pete, so something in that vein would be a fun episodic like PI series.
I hope Netflix will watch this.
Yeah.
Because it would be perfect for them.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
I take it you do hear from readers. I mean, the reader who showed up dressed as your character. Do you
Yeah,
get emails about alter ego and secret identity?
I do. My favorite email in relation to secret identity, and I got a few of them, was basically, thankfully, I like the book. It was a great read, which is always great for the writer's ego to hear that. But also, after I read the book, they would say that they went to the comic shop to try and find a copy of the Legendary Lynx because they thought that the world felt so real that they thought this book has to exist. Like this must be based in some fact. And so the twist there is that we ended up taking those pages from Secret Identity and expanding them and coloring them and making a collection, a comic book collection, that we did very tongue in cheek. Like if you read the comic, it's written as if it was a period piece, like something that came out in the 70s. So now we've actualized the idea, so people can find the links. But there was that period where I get emails, people asking me like, I can't find this comic anywhere, and so that was neat.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and a nice testament to the book.
Okay, we have one more minute, I think. What do you admire most about your characters in Alter Ego and Secret Identity?
What do I admire most of them? I admire their drive. I admire their ability to make tough decisions and really fight for themselves, which I think is hard to do in the world or as people. Like sometimes we don't stand up for ourselves, or we just take a lot of stuff and roll over. But I think both characters are very strong-willed, powerful, driven women who have overcome a lot of trauma and tragedy to reach for the things that they've always wanted. Carmen, you meet her as a child walking into the bodega or the newsstand with her dad and spinning the spinner rack of comics and being hypnotized by the comic book rack. And you have a similar moment with Annie where she finds the Lynx comic and it's like a talisman for her. And so, they both manifested their dreams, whether it was hard, and it was hard for both of them. And I think that's really something to be admired.
Absolutely. Is there anything you would not write about?
I mean, I wouldn't probably write about violence against children, I guess. Yeah.
And I think that building character is very hard.
Yeah.
I know some authors will actually write letters to their character to get an idea of who they are. Do you have any tips on building character that you use?
I wish I was that kind of specific in that I would write character profiles or letters to the character, but I'm a pretty visual writer. And so what I do is I create what I call a cast document. And it helps me like literally paste pictures of actors under the characters' names. And that helps me visualize them. And I usually have a long running playlist of songs that aren't necessarily songs mentioned in the book, but are songs that make me think of the book. And so I write in the day, and sometimes I'll take a walk in the evening, and that's what I'll listen to when I'm actively like writing the book. And I'll listen to the playlist and kind of visualize these scenes. And a lot of the time I'll come back and have an idea for something that's related to the book. So everyone has different things. So I wouldn't say do that and success will come, but whatever works for you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And we're going back to Joey, and I hope everyone here goes out and buys at least 3 of Alex's books.
Thank you. And thanks, Oline. Thank you so much for the great question. Thanks to everyone for attending. And thanks for having me.
What an extraordinary hour. I feel like we need a part 2, Dorothy, maybe a part 3, or we could all just gather here weekly and listen to Oline and Alex talk, because completely fascinated.
Good.
I think what you mentioned so much, authenticity, telling your story, and connecting, right? Connecting to people. This is what we do every day at the Broward Public Library Foundation. And thank you so much to Alex and to Oline for taking the time and doing this. Before we go, thank you. Before we go, I just would like to really touch on a few of our key programs that we use to connect and bring the next generation of readers and readers of all ages back into the libraries. Our summer learning program, where we reach out to an estimated 100,000 children, teens, and adults participants through free and accessible programs throughout the summer months to build reading and learning skills. The Books and Bears programs at the holidays 3,000 disadvantaged preschool children receive a new book, and a cuddly teddy bear at holiday parties that we do at 30 libraries throughout Broward County. I think about the SAT and ACT workshops where we help and get the next generation prepared to go on to higher learning. About 450 high school sophomores and juniors participate in this free program. And the Storybook Festival, which brings books to life for young minds every year at Southwest Regional Library. It's a family-friendly festival with interactive storytellers, performances, and popular fantasy forest. And of course, the literary feast season. I like to say it's a season. It starts with Lit Lunch, and it ends with Night of Literary Feast, where we spotlight authors like Alex and really cool and intimate opportunities of connecting. And this is what we do so well. We're so happy that you guys could join us this evening. And if you would like to learn more about the foundation, please visit us at bplfoundation.org. And most importantly, follow on social media at BPL Foundation. Thank you, everybody, for attending this evening's LitLIVE Extra, and hope to see you at the library.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Have
so
a good
much.
night.
Thanks for having us.